All right, everyone. MarkRogersTV, the voice of college football, and it's our big Wednesday night each and every week. And this time we actually have not football to talk about necessarily, but we have guys who play and coach football, talking football, that we can talk about what they talked about today. And we've got our Florida State Seminoles live show starting right now, 7 o'clock Eastern time. So we thank you so much for joining the live chat. And of course, it's Jason Parker from Chop Chat, and it's Logan Robinson from Knoll Game Day. So please join them on their respective sites, as now is the time to get serious about tracking your team, your conference, the national scene, locking in, and this is the place to do it, as well as their two respective sites. How you boys doing tonight?
Good. How are you?
I'm doing great. I am doing great.
Got football to talk about a little bit, and I feel like I was talking to y'all before we started. Football is in the air. At least for me, it is. Feels like it.
It's got that feel. It's got that feel. It definitely has when there's something slightly new to talk about, even though we're still talking about last season. At least there's a little bit fresh of a vibe there. And Willie Taggart hit the podium today, along with Tamari and Terry and Marvin Wilson, the stars from both the offensive and defensive sides of the ball for Florida State. And Logan, we'll start with you in regards to what Coach Taggart had to say, if anything stood out to you as a theme.
The theme seemed to be like, forget about last year. And that's what he talked about for the most part. And also that they've moved on. Last year was last year, and they won't talk about it unless they're asked. That's kind of like the team's mentality right now. A lot of focus was also on the quarterback situation. There was kind of a slip up today through who's naming the quarterback and who's it going to be and all that kind of stuff. But I think it's solidified that Blackman will get the first couple of reps that Taggart said. And then Alex Hornibrook, the Wisconsin transfer, will come in and get get the next majority of them. There's still a competition to be held. I think Taggart kind of entailed to focus on that. But the theme is just, last year was last year. It was not a nice sight to see. That's not how Florida State football plays. That's not how they've played in a long time. I think he's happy with the coaching hires. He talked about Kendall Briles and how that offense and his players going into a second year into the Gulf Coast system that he calls it. He thinks it'll be a lot smoother and players are going to be a little bit more used to it. And he's also got some of his guys that he's recruited solely too coming in. So, last year was last year. And I know that's kind of what we've talked about. And I know Jason has too, that, you kind of got to forget about it and move on. It's not going to help looking back at it. But Willie Taggart, I think, knows that there's got to be a success. There's got to be definitely a successful season this year. It doesn't have to be crazy, but you got to, that bowl game has got to be reached, and you've got to compete with your rivals, because that will only continue success for recruitment moving forward.
And touching on what Logan said there, the big soundbite that got me was when Coach Taggart said, "I don't think it's fair to our 2019 team to continue to talk about 2018's team," and that's really hit the nail on the head. And we've talked about it here, and we'll talk about it as the preseason goes on. Yes, 2018 happened. It was 5-7. It was a losing season. Talking about it is not going to make this a 10-win team, make this the ACC champions, Atlantic Division champions, conference champions again. What it's going to do is a team that actually wants to. And you've got both Tamari and Terry and Marvin Wilson, arguably two of the bigger leaders. I would say maybe not so much leaders as far as their experience and whatnot, but as far as both their talent and what's expected out of them, because I think both big things are expected this coming season. But we talked about it a little bit. The word I would use to describe today for all three of the FSU representatives was humble. I think you saw a different FSU group that was in Charlotte this year. You saw a group that, we talked about it last season, the hashtags, the do something. There was all that hoopla surrounding what FSU football was going to be in 2018, and we saw what happened. I think you saw a group of guys who were humbled by what took place last year and also realize what 2019 has to be, that it has to be, and we talked to Coach Taggart about that earlier this summer. It's not just a, hey, let's go 6-6 and just qualify for a bowl game. We want to be 8-4. We want to be 9-3, push for a double-digit win season and go to a decent bowl game to the FSU standard, what FSU has set in the past.
So, Jason, what you're talking about right there, I find interesting because my view of ACC kickoff, this day 1 of 2, and it being the Atlantic Division teams, is somewhat skewed, entirely skewed, I should say, by the television coverage, because that's where I saw it. And I track these media days across the country, the Power 5 and half for a number of years. So for Florida State, we know that the way the ACC has been configured, and because of the power structure going back to 2011, 12, and 13 in there, that it was Florida State and everybody else. And then it was Clemson's coming, Florida State's holding them off. Florida State can still lay down the hammer, and Clemson's still, now Clemson keeps coming and coming. And then it was a, who's it going to be this year? And then Clemson takes off. And no longer is there a sense of we're playing a 1-game season. We're playing for the Atlantic Division, and that's October 20th against Clemson. This is it's a balanced division. We've got a lot of, there are no bad teams, no bad programs in the division to beat up on. Everybody's capable. Everybody makes bowl games for the most part. Louisville obviously being the aberration right now, but they're only 1 year removed from being a very good program. So maybe they bounce back in the next 2 or 3 years. But just that humility I sensed from Florida State, but I also sensed it on the flip side from Clemson, to where I heard Dabo Swinney make a comment about maybe Trevor Lawrence isn't going to ever lose a game. He made a comment like that because they kept throwing around 15-0, and he said, hey, maybe the kid never loses a game. Well, he's got 2 more years of eligibility. One of the offensive linemen, I think it was, can't recall exactly who Clemson brought along the offensive front, but he made the comment, we go out there and we decide, well, if we play up to our capabilities, we can dominate this team on the other side. Most games we show up, we think, as long as we've got it together, we're going to dominate. We're not concerned with anyone else. There just seemed to be a little bit more of that from Clemson. Like they've flipped a switch and gone from, hey, even though they've been extremely good and won national championships, Dabo's carried that. We're an underdog. We're still not an elite all-time blue blood. So we're still trying to catch up to everyone to, hey, we've arrived and we're it.
Well, and to give them credit, and we will give Clemson credit here on this one. They're 15-0 national champions. As far as I'm concerned, and Logan can touch on this in a second, they deserve whatever they want to talk. If they want to come in humble, if they want to come in and brag all day, that's fine. They have earned that moment. I think that to an extent, I personally think that just focusing on FSU for a second. FSU couldn't come in as the same FSU trio, whether whoever came along with Coach Taggart, they couldn't come in with the same, I don't want to use the word borderline cocky attitude, but the same swagger that they had last offseason. 5-7 just won't do that. 15-0 will allow you to be a little braggadocious, and and you can get away with it because you were one of the arguably the best college football teams in the history of the sport. So I'm not as offended by it as an FSU fan as some people may want, but now you got to go out there and prove it on the field, and you hit the nail on the head. Trevor Lawrence could win the next 30 games and be arguably the greatest football player in the history of college football. He could also tear his ACL against Texas A&M in the second game of the season, or Georgia Tech in the first game. You won't know. We won't know until the games are played. So that's the one hesitation I would say with Clemson being a little bit more braggadocious.
I think Florida State also, to mention too, that there's a lot of coaches with their jobs on the line too. And I think the players definitely, of course, notice that. They built close relationships with them, and they also know what they were messing up on too. It wasn't just the coach's fault. Off the field things and their mentality was shown on the field, and things like that, and academically. And I think Taggart's kind of strengthened the way that he's working this team as more of a CEO than anything, a little bit more smartly, brought back down to earth, most definitely this offseason than what it was last year, because it was all about rah-rah and dancing and having a good time. And I think that was mainly a focus for Taggart to kind of, the players went through a rough patch with Jimbo leaving, and he was trying to get them on his side and, make them feel close with him, which I think he did. But as a successful process and the way it delivered on the field didn't work. So I think you see a more settled down team, more focused on results on the inside and not caring about where it's being posted, and not the ego is kind of left at the door. I think that helps a whole lot. But with coaches' jobs being on the line, that plays a big toll, because if Florida State goes through another season like that, people are going to lose their jobs. A lot of them are.
James Mankstol is earned the award for being the first on the live chat today. George as well, big Florida fan, big Mark Rogers TV, voice of college football fan. George jumps on all the live streams and helps us out, but he's a big Gators fan. We've got Rob Krause, who is digging the beard. Thank you, Rob. This has everything to do with laziness and nothing to do with fashion. No fashion statements here. It's nothing but laziness.
I was trying to realize. I was trying to remember who's in the playoffs or something. I didn't know if there was a playoff beard going on or something.
We could work on that possibly. I'll pick a team and make it a playoff beard. Maybe that's the next contest here, or the first contest at Mark Rogers TV. All right. We've got all sorts of people on the line. I've asked for comments and questions. I see nothing of reason here, except for somebody brought it up, and I apologize because I'm not going to be able to name the handle because I've since passed it by, but not a whole lot of talk about the switch to the 3-4 defense and what you two gents believe is going to be the outcome there, and if it's a good fit, and what you think about the personnel situation there.
I'll let you go, Jason. I want to see your thoughts.
My concern with it, and Mark and I, we've talked about this before. What linebackers are you going to have? You have Dontavius Jackson. You have a couple other guys. You have Emmett Rice. You have Josh Brown. You have some guys, but who are going to be? And that's going to be my one area of concern so far right now is the linebacker group. So my concern is when you go from a 4-3 to a 3-4. Are you just moving? A defensive end to more the edge position? How are they going to do that? Because right now, the linebacker group is a question mark for me as far as having, at least two bona fide guys who can go in, or at least one guy who can play with Dontavius for a majority of the plays.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the linebacker situation is interesting too. And I think once fall camp starts, also the secondary situation with two guys that are being moved around kind of don't really know confirmed they'll actually be there, but with Levante Taylor and Jaden Woodby at safety positions, and also you've got a young guy with Asante Samuel at corner. I think you feel comfortable with Stanford Samuels, of course, as the other corner, but the linebacker situation is tricky. Dontavius Jackson is back as a veteran. He's put on 6 pounds since the spring. It's kind of you kind of look to the young ones too and see how they've been improving once they've just arrived at Florida State. Jaleel McRae is a guy that I think physically is a player that can play early at Florida State. And then there's also Kalen DeLoach, who's also a physical kind of guy and who's been putting in a lot of work this offseason as a recruit, and also coming into Florida State. So it's you got to kind of look at the young guys for the linebacker core. And I still think the secondary is something to keep an eye on. I don't think things are set in stone right now once competitive play happens. And there's always something that happens during fall camp that kind of switches position players around. So we'll keep an eye on it.
Guys, it's a large departure from preparing for an NFL season and being a fan, media member, whatever you are, in preparation for personnel breakdowns and knowledge of the roster in the NFL. In college football, most of these preseason magazines that we all go out and buy, these things are produced back in April and May.
Mhm.
And there's such a churn of roster personnel, such a turnover from year to year in college football, that a lot of the forecasting of depth charts has to do with recruiting rankings and just who got the most time and who appears to be next in line. And then we do at some point get a depth chart from the school typically. But I find it fascinating each and every week one of the season when I run through what I've seen and what I've researched and what I've read online from probably 10 or 12 different sources of who should be on the field versus who's that guy that's starting at outside linebacker? Heard nothing about this guy. Can't find his name anywhere. Oh, yeah. He was supposed to be a third teamer. He must have showed out at camp or showed out the last couple of weeks, or somebody got hurt, and then he beat out the number 2 guy, and boom, suddenly he's the starter. But we see it all the time.
Well, and that's my question with the linebacker group is what is the game plan? Is the game plan to have Dontavius in there as the guy who does most of the reps, and then you just basically have the other, 2 or 3 guys by committee? Will somebody come out of it? Will 1 or 2 more guys come out of fall practice before the Boise State game and do enough to earn significant playing time in that game? That's why the one hesitation is we're still 6 weeks to go until the season. We haven't even started fall camp yet. So that's why I'm not ready to push the panic button yet. I'm just saying that if the season started right now, that would be my area of concern.
Didn't see Taggart and Hampton. They just put Leonard, Barnett. They just put Leonard Warner from linebacker to defensive end. So they're obviously feeling comfortable in some area for someone stepping up. Maybe, of course, we know Hamza Nasruddin, very valuable player for Florida State's defense, one of their best tacklers. And then you also maybe Emmett Rice. He's gotten a little bit bigger, hard tackling kind of guy, big hitter. So I guess they're looking for that, and maybe young guys stepping up and coming in. It's just definitely, that's always been a linebacker situation. But I do think as a future prediction and like observation, I think Florida State is going to be very well set, hopefully, on the linebacker core. It's just this season as a whole right now is going to be an interesting thing to keep an eye on. But there's going to be some younger guys that are going to have to step up, and they will get some playing time, in my opinion.
And we've talked about this before, but the one guy to me that there's a big question mark, not for his talent, but where will he be put as far as the defense would be Lars Woodby.
Mm-hmm.
Lars Woodby. Is he going to play more of the safety position? Is he going to move up and play more of a linebacker position? Is he going to come in? Are they going to use him more in blitz packages the way they did LaMarcus Joyner during the 2013 season, the 2012 and 2013 season? So that's going to be another question. If he can play kind of that platoon, safety / linebacker spot and do well with it, then I will breathe a lot easier about that group.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to do some housekeeping here. Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football. So if you've stumbled upon us for a first time, or specifically with Florida State, 7 o'clock Eastern time, right here every Wednesday night at 7 o'clock Eastern time. Logan Robinson from Knoll Game Day. We got Jason Parker on the line from Chop Chat talking Florida State football. And Jason and I just completed a series in which these videos are being released every day, previewing every position. So you get your full dose of personnel breakdown from Jason and myself, Florida State football. All right, tonight's lineup, which is typically every Wednesday night, 7 o'clock Florida State, 8 o'clock Miami, 9 o'clock Ohio State. Well, we will have Miami talk with Cam Underwood from State of the U at 8 o'clock. At 9 o'clock, well, our Ohio State guys went ahead and posted last night. So they did a live stream last night right here at Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football. So that's already posted. Check it out. They're on the road toward the Big Ten Media Days in Chicago. So they taped early. And so you can check out that video. Ole Miss at 9:30. We got some Ole Miss talk from Rebel Walk at 9:30 Eastern time, and Alabama talk with Stephen M. Smith of Touchdown Alabama at 10 o'clock Eastern time. So I'm hanging out all night, and if there are any gaps, I will take calls, and we will be live streaming all night. Just keep in mind that we're going to stop down on the individual live streams and post those videos, so we have separate live streams for each particular team. The super chat's on. Contribute to the channel if you appreciate what we do here at Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football. Shop at Amazon if you appreciate what we do. Encourage you to do that to help us build the channel. We got the link down below in the description section. And everything, just about everything that we do here on video is released on audio as well. Google Play, Podbean, iTunes, Stitcher, and Spotify. And there is the Voice of College Football community as well. The link is below, and you can check out what that's all about. We will obviously, guys. What's that, Jason?
I said, take a deep breath. Good God, man.
We got to spit it out. People want to hear about football. They don't want to hear my promos, but they seem to mount. And then there's going to be more. There's going to be a list of like 18 here pretty soon with other things I have planned. But
Jesus,
hey, you got to keep this thing moving, don't you? You got to keep the show rolling. So
yes,
we will certainly get back to Florida State specifically, but in listening to the ACC Commissioner, John Swofford, who's been in place now for 22 years, I found a few interesting comments from him as he was making. I didn't see his speech from the podium, but I heard him interviewed on television. So the slant of the interview was, of course, the ACC Network. So it started there, but it was basically his statement about the conference, the strength of the conference, and so forth. Unlike some other conference commissioners, I'll look at Bob Bowlesby in particular out at the Big 12. There was no hyperbole for the most part. And Bowlesby said a few things the other day that I will probably cut a special video on because they were beyond ridiculous, skewing statistics and bowl numbers and all sorts of things to trumpet the league. And I understand this is the platform to do it. I've gone to the American Conference Media Days the last 3 or 4 years, and man, they got it right behind the commissioner about what did they call it? Basically, they're the 6th Power 5, Power 6, whatever they phrase it. And then that becomes the theme for the entire time. But in talking about the league, strength of the league, he talked about the league preparing, it taking a number of years to prepare itself to get to the point where they could launch their own network, that because of the dominance of basketball and the relative obscurity of football, which football's never obscure, but in comparison to other conferences, that there had to be that strengthening of a number of football programs to get to that point from a revenue standpoint, from an attention standpoint, and of course the broadening of the footprint to the Northeast with Syracuse and Pitt and Boston College and some others. The one interesting comment he made is he kept referencing the 15 schools in the conference. And of course, this is a football event. There are not 15 schools in the conference. I wish somebody else, namely myself, would have been in the chair interviewing him, because I would have wanted clarification on what 15 schools are playing football in this conference. So that would have been one of my points made there. And just didn't know if you guys had a chance to hear the commissioner, whether that was at the podium or being interviewed on TV regarding the ACC.
Logan, why don't you take this one first? Because I'm going to need some time to rip John Swofford after this. So I'm going to let you take a moment. I'm going to sip some water.
I can give you it. I was at work all day. I was going through the Twitter feed, and that was mainly it. I saw the Bowden dynasty was going to be shown. I do definitely make a note of that basketball from what Mark said. ACC has one of the best basketball conferences in the United States of America. I mean, it's always, you got Final Fours. There's usually 1 or 2 ACC teams in there. So basketball wise, that's a good note on him and what he said. But if we're on ACC Network and how I even had a chance of being created, I would give it to Florida State. And I'm just bringing up random subjects here, but in how it was even had a chance, Florida State kind of laid that stepping stone there for it to be created, and kind of Clemson paved the rest of the path. But the problem is now too, I believe in Tallahassee with some of the providers here, is that some of them, it's not available on with their packages. I've just seen things on it on social media and whatnot. But I was at work all day, didn't get to see much of it. Just didn't get to hear all of what Swofford said. So maybe Jason, since he seems like he's got to let loose on him, can go and give it off.
Okay. Deep breath. Deep breath.
This should be good.
I hate John Swofford. I hate the leadership of the ACC. And I'm going to tell you why. In the last 10 years of basketball, half of the champions have been from the ACC. 5 of the last 10 champions have been from the ACC. And I guarantee you, if I had not just said that fact, I would say 90 to 95% of the people who are watching right now would not have known that. 3 of the last 6 champions in college football in the FBS are from the ACC. And everyone would know that. This has become a football conference. And Swofford and the good old boys from the state of North Carolina and from that area they refuse to accept that football is where the money is, where the prestige is, and what's important. They still treat this like it's the same basketball conference that Florida State joined in the early 1990s when it was Florida State and basically the 8 dwarves in football, and it was Duke and North Carolina in basketball. And you had Wake Forest and a couple other teams, but for the most part, it was Duke and North Carolina. So as far as the leadership of the ACC, it's time for John Swofford to go. It's past his time. He's the good old boy. Network has continued to run the ACC and has continued to make it a decent conference. It's a better conference than what it was when FSU joined. Is it where it could be? Not even close. As far as the ACC Network is concerned, to me, it is a joke. And I say this as somebody who is a subscriber to a cable network that the ACC Network does not have a deal with. And they say, oh, call your cable provider, call your cable provider. I haven't called one time, and I don't plan on it. This has been talked about since when Florida State was playing for a national championship in the 2013 season. Oh, the ACC Network. Oh, the SEC's got their network. The Pac-12's got their network. The Big Ten's got their network. This is something that's been talked about now for over half a decade. And you were sitting here, we were talking about, I believe, August 22nd is the first date. So we're at nearly the 1 month mark before this network, and you have got major cable providers in the state of Florida and across the country that still have not signed on to it. That's the fault of Swofford and the ACC. When you announced this 3 years ago, you don't announce this with, oh, hey, we're going to launch this network, but we don't have any deals yet. We're going to do it as we go along. They didn't do that with the SEC network. The Big Ten network didn't do that with their affiliates with Fox. Pac-12 network didn't do that, but that's a different story. But these networks, they had a structure in place before this was done. And the ACC is acting like, oh, well, it's the ACC network. We're just going to throw it together and everything will come together. It's not going to be like that. And it just goes to show to me, just my opinion, the ineptness of a decent amount of the people who are running the conference.
I do know, to underline your point, that the ACC network is going to launch with about 25% of the subscribers that the SEC network had when it launched.
And announced this 3 years ago. This is not like they announced this a year ago and said, oh, by the way, in 1 year, we're going to start a network. It was in 2016. I believe it was also at ACC kickoff in 2016. So we're talking about 3 years ago, this was announced. And you have 3 years to work out these deals. Yes, they have DirecTV. Yes, they have a couple of the I think it's View and a couple of the other, minor that are gaining in popularity with the younger crowd. But I'm sorry, and I'll say it. You don't have Comcast. I'm sorry. It's a huge cable provider that owns a network. They own NBC, and you're sitting here telling me you can't work out a deal with them in 3 years. This is a problem, and this is the problem: is that the ACC still thinks that things are in the 1990s, the 1980s, and they refuse to accept it's 2019 and it's time to wake the hell up. Whew. All right, I feel better now.
I can't imagine that that's a choice that they're making, not to be as widespread as the other conference channels and networks. I would think that maybe ineptness, yes, but in regards to actually making that choice, or I really don't have the insight or don't know what's going on to answer the question. I just know, again, to back up your argument are the fact that it's only going to open in about 25% of the households at the SEC network, about 20 million compared to close to 90 million for the SEC network when it launched in 2000, whatever it was, 14 or 15.
Mm-hmm.
The other comment, this is the one I missed. I finally dug out my notes. The comment that I forgot that he made, because he was asked about the Clemson dominance, and it's great to have a national championship team in your conference, but there's such a gap between Clemson and everyone else. And his defense for that was basically that the same thing exists in the SEC with Alabama and everyone else.
I would argue that completely because
No.
Yeah.
so you have
Are there LSUs and Georgias right now in the
Yeah.
ACC and Floridas and Texas A&Ms? No, there aren't.
This shows you the
Just
inept,
not that smart.
ineptness is the nice word. I want to say idiocy,
I'm just idiotic.
stupidity, just the absolute insanity with that this is the leadership running a Power 5 conference.
And denial.
I will say, and being well-spoken is not the end-all be-all. There are very capable leaders, very capable CEOs of companies, organizations, conferences that just aren't necessarily comfortable or the most charismatic people, but they've got brains. They know how to organize, lead, influence, do other things. But I got to say that I had not heard him speak in a long, long time. And so there was no memory of the way he portrayed himself, and I was just not impressed with him fumbling around and just really had nothing to say or no real theme. And again, I didn't see his speech from the podium. I saw him being interviewed, that he didn't really. I see a Greg Sankey, for example, from the SEC, who he has a handle on what the mission of the conference is, what their objectives are, what they're trying to promote at that function, at that event. And it's very clear to everyone. And Sankey does a great job without sounding ridiculous. He doesn't skew it. And with the success of the football conference, he rarely has to skew it like the Big 12 I heard this week. But he very much highlights the strength of the conference and balances out with the other sports and with the academics and the other good things that are going on. And it's a well-crafted message from the SEC and the other conferences as well, for the most part.
Greg Sankey, to me, and it hurts to give the SEC some credit here as a member of an ACC school here. Greg Sankey, to me, reminds me a lot of a Vince McMahon, in the sense of he's someone who, and Greg Sankey says some weird stuff, and he says some stuff out there that you think, when you do a deep dive into it, you either find out, the truth about what he said, or just, how he kind of stretches the truth a little bit, but he says it in a way to where you believe it initially. He kind of, he sells it in a way. John Swofford, to me, and when I say good old boy, I don't care that he's from North Carolina. I don't care about that. I use that as an example more to talk about him being on the basketball side of things. That's what I mean by the good old boy network, the good old boy from the 80s and the 90s who still view the ACC as a basketball-first conference. And that's fine if that's their prerogative, whatnot. And I don't care about, where he's from or anything like that. What I care about is the fact that he's been the commissioner of what is now a Power 5 conference for over 2 decades. And it just feels like he doesn't get it. And it feels like the leadership of the conference doesn't get it. You have a Florida State team, and this to me is an example, and we'll talk about it this weekend here on ChopChat.com, how, to me, the ACC screws up on their social media. They had a social media post earlier this week where it was talking about which team do you think was better, 2013 FSU or 2018 Clemson, and it presented a lot of the facts back and forth. You have arguably 2 of the greatest college football teams in the history of the sport. Instead of putting them against each other, putting the fan bases against each other, praise the fact that you have half of the last 6 champions in college football have come from your conference. You have 2 of the greatest national champions in the history of the sport, not in the last 10 years, last 20 years, in the history of the sport. And this is a conference that does not they do not sell themselves, especially with football. With the money-making sport, you've got the national champions set to play on your network 1 week after the launch, and like you said, it's in 25% of the homes that they have the SEC Network when the SEC Network launched in 2014. To me, that's unacceptable.
Yeah, they should be praising both teams together and showing some kind of highlight of how good they were. And then now they're trying to create some argumenting between both fan bases, which they know that they'll get a reaction from them, not only between the two fan bases, but also third-party teams coming in too.
So how good do you guys think the conference is? And before you guys answer my question, in terms of capitalizing on that particular comparison to champions, as Jason mentions, I also think that certainly if we go back just to 2016, that as a conference commissioner, he could have certainly made it more well known. I dive into the deep metrics. I'm looking at bowl scores. I'm the nerd that does that. So I didn't hear a whole lot of people recognizing that the ACC could have had a lock, stock, barrel argument after the 2016 season that it was the best conference, and I think there was a missed opportunity there. But right now, as we go into 2019, how good is the conference?
Go ahead, Logan.
From last year, it's kind of all over the place, and I think even heading into next year, I mean, I'm just kind of looking even at the start of Florida State's opponents on their side. I mean, Virginia's coming up. Syracuse likes to show its flashes here and there, but they just lost their quarterback that's been there for a while. And then Virginia Tech always gets a little bit of hype, and then they fall apart at the end. Who else is in there? Of course, Clemson's there. They hold their ground, and Florida State, I think, it's the ones that you have to look to keep that conference alive and get its good showing from and positive. I don't know, just it helps the ACC quite a bit. I also don't like, though, that whenever, we got to bring up also the ACC championship too, because Florida State's in the same division as Clemson. You put Florida State in a different, you put them in separate divisions there and let them face off against each other in the ACC championship. That will grow the brand quite a bit even more, in my opinion. And that's a problem that I think ACC fans and college football fans have kind of complained about for a while now. Clemson versus whoever the heck else, maybe it will be this year, won't do as well as a Florida State versus Clemson, because that's really, I mean, that's where you get most of your viewership from, are those two games, or that game with Florida State. I think someone put out a rankings earlier this year. I don't know if it was an outlet from CBS or somebody, but they put Florida State at number 5 out of the top tier programs in college football. Going into this year, I do think that it's going to be all over the place once again. I don't see anybody else. I mean, Florida State should have a hold most likely on their teams. Miami's going to be maybe a tough game. I think Virginia will be even a little bit tougher. Their third game going up to Virginia. It's been all over the place the last couple of years. Florida State, like Mark mentioned, was on a good roll in 2016 and were arguing to be one of the best football conferences during its time, but it's fallen off since. So I guess we can blame Jameis for leaving Florida State, and also Jimbo for leaving Florida State for that.
Well, first of all, we blame Jimbo for everything. I thought we talked about that.
Yeah, we used to blame Jameis for every single thing, but
I never blame Jameis. I never blamed him, but I blame Jimbo for everything.
Even if your AC went out, you wouldn't blame Jameis?
No, not at all. Blame Jimbo all the time.
Well, after based on the response from the live chat and my conversations specifically with Jason here a few times, it seems like everybody's thinking that I'm blaming Willie Taggart for everything. But man, I was a little hard on Willie. But my goodness, we'll see.
You are 100% blaming Willie, and we've talked about that. We will talk about that for 6 weeks or so. To answer your question, entering 2019, I would say out of the 5 Power 5 conferences, I would rank the ACC third. I think the SEC right now is number 1. because of the fact that you have an Alabama, a Georgia, an LSU, a Florida team. These were all 10-win teams last season. You have teams like Tennessee, South Carolina that are kind of like on that bubble. Are they going to break through to that next level, or are they going to stay back? So I feel like they are right now number one. Number two, I would say the Big Ten, because once again, I mean, you have a division. Like we talk about the ACC Atlantic, how that 2016 season when you had a Florida State, a Louisville, and a Clemson, that's a division in the Big Ten East that has a Michigan, Ohio State, and Penn State trifecta right now that could compete against that. I would put the ACC at third right now with a potential to move up to number two if Clemson can beat Texas A&M and if Florida State gets off to a hot start. If Florida State and Clemson are both undefeated entering that game on October 12th, I think the ACC would be two and be in the conversation for can they be the number one conference. But to go back to what you said about what can the ACC do, and we talked about this before, let's go back even before the 2016 season. Let's go back to that 2014 season when Florida State played in the inaugural college football playoff. People seem to forget that Florida State was the only undefeated team that season entering the bowl season. The only one out of any team in any bowl game that was undefeated, and they went into the playoffs as a number 3 seed. Now, I get that everyone's going to talk about, you have Oregon, you have Alabama, you have I believe Ohio State, who ended up winning the title that year. But the ACC did hardly, to me, just from the outsider perspective, did as little as possible to help promote Florida State in that case. Maybe getting behind Florida State, getting behind what could be, a chance at back-to-back national titles that season, that would have done something. Maybe get them to a 2 seed. I personally think that you're undefeated. You should be the number 1 seed. You're the defending champs. But even getting up to the 2 seed, who knows? Who knows what happened in the situation? But that's another case where the ACC doesn't take advantage of the football powers and focuses more on basketball, Olympic sports, and whatnot, and doesn't focus on the moneymaker.
Well, I think one of the reasons they were a lower seed, besides squeaking by most weeks that season, was you could make the flip argument that they were the only undefeated team in the country because they played in the ACC. So it was almost a detriment to them that they played in arguably the worst conference. Therefore, it was easier to be undefeated. Also, if you elevate Florida State to the 1 seed, then they would have been playing Ohio State, which turned out to be the best team. But I think they get bounced regardless.
Do you know that Ohio State was the best team if they play a Florida State team? I mean, that Alabama team was a very good team, but that's also a Florida State team that was on a 29-game winning streak by that point when they went to the playoff. I'm not saying that
did you watch those games, Jason?
Yes, I absolutely watched every single second of every single game.
I knew watching Ohio State and Alabama, the winner of this game, I didn't know that Ohio State was going to beat Alabama, but I knew that the winner of that game was going to roll in the national championship game. That was the national championship game. And then Oregon was like a 6-point favorite against Ohio State. And I said, seriously, can I back up my Brinks truck to Vegas now?
Probably because they beat the brakes out of Florida State and they thought Florida State might have it.
Sure.
I mean, it was kind of a shock there. And whenever Florida State lost, and in my opinion,
all 1-game scenarios. So I am the first one that's on here all the time waving people down when they go too heavy on, hey, it was a 1 game, and I say yes, it was 1 game. Let's not let's go too crazy that this would happen 10 times. But
would you say, right? What I'm saying is, on paper, knowing what we know now, 5 years later, does Ohio State maybe beat Florida State in that playoff if they play in the playoff game? On paper, probably, but we don't know that unless it actually had taken place.
Of course, we don't know if
what I'm saying
Ohio State would beat Louisville this year because they're not going to play.
What I'm saying is that the ACC should have done a better job of promoting their product. You had at the time a team that was unbeaten that entered the season winning 16 straight games, was the defending national champions, and yes, they were close games. I'm sorry, the Boston College game, the Miami game. The Clemson game in overtime. Yes, these were close games, but FSU was still winning. And while FSU was still winning, and in 17 games, 18 games, 19 games, was the ACC promoting their best product? No. That's what I'm saying. Is the argument is the ACC does not promote their best product, and their best product is football talent. Now it's Clemson. Before it was Florida State. So here's the question. Are they going to promote the 2019 Clemson Tigers the way they should have promoted the 2014 Florida State Seminoles?
And let me, again, put this in a context in terms of, so I'm consistent with my arguments, because anybody that watches me on a regular basis knows that I make the statement all the time that the results of the games in the playoff, to me, don't justify what should have happened in the selection. We can all look back after the games are played and say, why'd you leave them out? Or, yeah, that justifies them being selected. The selections are made based on the track records at the time. And therefore, I'm not big into revisionist history in regards to who should be selected, because I still say in 2017, Ohio State should have been selected, not Alabama. People don't get my argument. I'm not saying that Alabama wasn't the best team. I predicted them to win their 2 playoff games. I just don't think they earned their way into the playoff. That doesn't mean I didn't think that they were the best team in the playoff. Those are 2 separate things. And so, yes, Florida State, if we were just selecting records, should have been the number 1 seed. They were the undefeated team, but the College Football Playoff Selection Committee is charged with seeding the teams in the manner in which they believe they are best to 4th best.
I should have asked us.
I have 3 statistics here, gentlemen, that I think are quite interesting, and 2 of them won't surprise you, maybe all 3, since you guys watch every play of every game. But these are advanced metrics from last season with Florida State. So in terms of Florida State's offensive success rate, so this is a measurement of how many yards you should gain on first down to be successful, to set yourself up for second down, and then on second down, how many yards should be gained for third down. And obviously, the success rate on third down is simply, do you convert it into a first down? And so Florida State had a 33% success rate on all 3 downs. That is 124th in the nation out of 130 teams last year. Our next statistic, so 124 out of 130 teams in success rate of yardage gained in each down. The other one is that Florida State, when you convert special teams and where they started offensively in field position and where the defense started against the opposing offense, they were last in the nation in field position last year. And then thirdly, they were minus 11 in turnover margin. And based on national averages in regards to fumbles and interceptions and what should be recovered, that there's a luck factor there. This should bode well for this season. They should have been plus 2.5, but they were minus 11. So maybe luck did not factor into the defensive performance last year. And they should actually, the luck should even out for this team in 2019.
Well, Willie alluded to it. It was the next to last question he answered, was where the question was brought up about special teams, and it was put more about returning kicks for touchdowns and whatnot. But he hit the nail on the head. The special teams has to be better and has to set up that FSU offense. It's simple math. It's a heck of a lot easier to go 60 yards than it is to go 80 every single drive. So if you can give them 10, 15 extra yards.
Yeah, it kept on feeling like Florida State's offense was just going to stay on its own end zone for most of the games. It was just continuous, and FSU's offense was just not good enough to move anywhere. We could tell, and that didn't help. That doesn't help offensive line wise. Couldn't move anywhere. You had a running back that was kind of trying to do a little bit too much. And then you also had a quarterback that just couldn't really read that well. If anybody watched film on him or anything, or if you were even in the stands, he just wasn't reading anything but one player. So hopefully the factor of having Blackman there, if he's going to be a starter, who we've seen on film and that we've seen in practice, and of course it's practice, but still who can read his wide receivers, the ball, and having the luck factor and all that kind of jazz. But now Mark Snyder will be the special teams coordinator of the season. He'll take that role, and we'll see how that progresses for Florida State. But it was pretty pitiful last year, and that doesn't help at all for your offense.
All right, Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football. This is what we do each and every Wednesday night. Come to you at 7 o'clock Eastern time for Florida State football talk. You join what is the self-proclaimed best live chat room in college football. We've got a number of people that participate on almost all the live streams, and they say, hey, this is the best live chat in college football. So I say, absolutely. It is the best live chat room in college football. So there you go. So participate in the chat, ask us questions, make your comments, and we'll get to you as much as we possibly can. But it's 7 o'clock Eastern time. And as we get closer, obviously, to fall camp, we'll start to dig through the personnel and the battles for positions and the storylines that come out. God forbid any injuries. And then, of course, prep for Boise State as Florida State tries to erase a record that I'm sworn not to say one more time since we've officially started football season 2019. They're 0-0.
You'll figure
Everybody
out
happy with me? They're 0-0.
You'll figure out a way to blame Willie. We all know what's going to happen. Somehow you're going to post something, blame Willie. Hashtag blame Willie. That's what Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football, is going to do. But it's fine.
That's what I seem to do. I just have a something against guys that turn top 15 talent into 5-win football teams.
So you have something against Jimbo Fisher. Okay, got it. Anyway, shots fired.
All right. We'll be back, everyone, next Wednesday. So we can continue this next Wednesday. So I'll have a full week to think of a comeback, and it'll probably take me that long. And we've got Miami football talk coming up here at 8 o'clock Eastern time, so stay tuned for that. We've got Ole Miss at 9:30. We've got Alabama at 10 o'clock, and I will fill in the blanks with others who are on my Twitter feed and text messaging me in terms of trying to jump on here at some point tonight. So we will be live all night for as long as I feel like going. But I'm committed to 10:30 at this point. Committed to 10:30. So
long night.
Good God.
Folks, don't be so selfish and just take this in yourself each and every week. Tell your friends, your family, your social media acquaintances that we are here talking college football every Wednesday night, and specifically Florida State at 7 o'clock Eastern time, and dive into those position previews with Jason and myself. He was the brains. I simply hit record and wound up Jason and let him fire away on his knowledge on Florida State football. So it was a good time.
I came in on a Saturday for that, so please watch. Good stuff.
Jason put in the work.
Yes, he did. Rolled up his sleeves.
Getting that overtime pay. What you talking about?
All right, boys. We appreciate the good work tonight as well.
Yes, enjoyed it. We're getting close.
Have a great week.
We are getting close. I can smell it.
That's it. And I believe we have more people on the line than I've ever seen at one time, like 65 people currently on the line. So this happens each and every, not just with the Florida State, but every live stream I do, there are the most people on when I'm signing off. So what you need to do is you need to check out the schedule, which is 7 o'clock Eastern time every Wednesday night, number one. Number two, go back, watch the video. It's going to post here in just a few minutes. All right, guys, thank you so much. And again, join Jason Parker at Chop Chat. Join Logan Robinson at Knoll Game Day for all your Florida State football needs. All right, guys, have a good one. Thank you so much.